The fluorescent lights hummed their institutional song at 2:44 a.m. when Dr. Marcus Hargrove first noticed Elena Martinez wasn't like the other nurses. Not because she excelled, plenty of nurses could tie off a bleeder with steady hands, but because she did it like someone who'd tied off bleeders while rounds of ammunition punched through hospital walls. He watched her from the trauma bay entrance, arms crossed, designer glasses catching the glare of the overhead banks. A gunshot wound to the left shoulder, patient already sedated, blood pooling faster than the residents could manage their panic. Elena moved through the chaos like smoke moving through a room. No hurrying. No wasted motion. Just efficiency so clean it bordered on eerie, like watching someone perform choreography they'd repeated 10,000 times. "Where we scrape her up from?" Hargrove asked the charge nurse, nodding toward Elena as she guided a second-year resident's trembling fingers toward the correct intercostal space. "Application said rural clinics," Jenna replied, not looking up from the admit forms. References were thin. Small towns in Nevada and California, mostly. Nothing recent before Portland. "How long's she been here?" 8 months. Quiet. Keeps to herself. Why? Problem. Hargrove didn't answer. He watched Elena position the 14-gauge angiocath needle with the kind of casual precision that came from having done it under conditions that made a Portland ER on a Tuesday night look like a spa appointment. Her left hand had a slight tremor. He noticed it when she set down the syringe, but her right hand never wavered. She steadied the tremor by gripping the stainless steel counter, one breath, then released it like she'd killed it. The whole motion took maybe 2 seconds. A civilian might not have caught it. Hargrove had built a career on catching things civilians missed. Elena spoke to the resident, her voice soft and even. "Watch the angle. You're compensating for the blood pool. Treat the anatomy like it's on the imaging, not what you're seeing." The resident nodded, made the adjustment, and the needle went in clean. "Good," Elena said. She didn't praise. She stated facts. "The hiss you just heard is air escaping. That means you're in the right place. O2 sat's climbing now. You did that." The resident's face flushed with the strange mixture of relief and embarrassment that came from being corrected in front of an attending. But there was no condescension in Elena's voice. Just information. Pain is data. That's what she'd said last week during another trauma case, and Hargrove had filed that phrase away, examined it like he was looking for contraband. Senior nurses said things like pain is information. Combat medics said things like pain is data. The patient's oxygen saturation climbed to 94%. The bleeding slowed. The monitor showed sinus rhythm, steady and strong. The resident looked at Elena like she'd pulled him out of an ocean. Hargrove made a note on his tablet. He didn't write what he was actually thinking. He wrote, "EM, spatial efficiency, unusual procedural confidence, requires observation." But what he was thinking was, where did this woman come from? Mercy General sprawled across 18 blocks of Portland like a fortress, glass and steel, and the smell of antiseptic so thick it coated your sinuses by the time you made it through the main entrance. The ER was its engine room, a controlled chaos that sorted human suffering into triage categories and bed assignments. Hargrove had run it for 9 years. 9 years of board meetings, insurance negotiations, media relations, and the careful cultivation of relationships with the mayor's office and the state health department. He understood hospital politics the way symphony conductors understood music. Every instrument had to know its place, and the conductor was the only person who made decisions about who played and who stayed silent. Elena Martinez, as far as Hargrove could tell, didn't play an instrument at all. She simply appeared in trauma bays, fixed problems, and disappeared. She didn't attend the monthly staff socials. She didn't mention her family or her weekend plans or her Netflix binges. She didn't flirt with the residents or commiserate with the charge nurses about shift fatigue. She came in, did her job better than people who made twice her salary and half her effort, and then she left through the employee entrance and vanished into whatever carefully constructed anonymous life she'd assembled. That bothered Hargrove in a way he didn't want to examine too closely. Power, Hargrove had learned over 9 years of administration, was about visibility. It was about being the person everyone looked to, the voice everyone heard, the presence everyone felt when they walked into a room. It was about having the mayor on your speed dial and the hospital board voting on your recommendations without much discussion. It was about younger doctors watching to see how you handled problems, younger nurses taking cues from your demeanor about what was acceptable and what wasn't. It was about institutional gravity, the thing that made people orbit around you whether they wanted to or not. Elena Martinez seemed to have no interest in any of that. She moved through Mercy General's corridors like a ghost who'd forgotten she was dead, present but somehow not entirely there. And yet somehow, that absence had become its own form of presence. He'd noticed 3 residents asking for Elena specifically when they had difficult cases. One of the charge nurses had mentioned that new staff members asked Elena for advice before they asked their actual supervisors. The anesthesiologists, the ones who were difficult to impress, had started requesting her for surgeries. That wasn't supposed to happen. The hierarchy was doctors at the top, mid-level providers below them, nurses below that, with Hargrove's authority distributing itself through the structure like water finding the lowest points. Everyone had a place. Everyone understood their place. And then Elena had arrived, and somehow, without doing anything as obvious as demanding respect or building alliances, she'd managed to make people think she belonged somewhere she clearly didn't. On a Wednesday morning before Elena's shift, Hargrove had pulled her personnel file. 2 years of employment history. Bachelor's degree in nursing from University of Nevada, Reno, 2016. No military service checkbox. No national certifications beyond the basics. References consisted of 3 emails from small rural clinics, none of which offered much detail beyond reliable and competent. One reference mentioned she'd handled difficult trauma cases with unusual composure. That was from a clinic in Tonopah, population 2,400. Tonopah, Nevada, was the kind of place where unusual composure probably meant you didn't cry when you had to deliver bad news. How had that qualified her to walk into one of Portland's premier trauma centers and move like someone who'd been trained to save lives under conditions most people couldn't imagine surviving? 3 days later, Dr. Mills was assisting on a routine appendectomy. Elena was the surgical nurse. Standard procedure. In and out, 40 minutes, no complications expected. Hargrove wasn't scheduled to observe, but he was doing rounds and found himself in the OR observation gallery anyway, which he told himself was just routine supervision. The surgery went smoothly until the moment Elena tied off a bleeder near the appendiceal artery. She used a 3-loop suture technique that made Dr. Mills, who'd served as a combat medic with the Army's 101st Airborne before going to medical school, visibly freeze. His hand stopped moving. His eyes tracked Elena's fingers as she worked. When the nurse finished and stepped back, Mills stared at her face for a full 3 seconds, his eyes searching for something. Elena didn't meet his gaze. She simply cleaned her instruments and moved on to the next task, her movements mechanical and precise and completely aware that Mills was still looking at her. From the observation gallery, Hargrove watched this entire exchange unfold. He watched Mills's recognition die on his face. He watched Elena refuse to acknowledge it. And he felt something cold and certain crystallize in his chest. That suture technique wasn't taught in nursing school. That was field medicine. That was what you did when you had maybe 2 minutes to control a bleed with materials you weren't supposed to be using, and you needed the bleeder to stay tied while someone else moved the patient. Hargrove had never seen it in a civilian OR before. It belonged in a different world entirely. The surgery finished. Elena removed her gloves, the latex snapped like small gunshots in the tense silence, and stepped away from the table. Mills watched her go. Hargrove watched Mills watching her. And somewhere in the machinery of the ER below them, other people were bleeding and other nurses were trying to save them. That evening, in the nurses' station during shift change, Hargrove made a casual announcement while the staff was gathered around the scheduling board. He was good at making casual announcements. It was one of his signature moves. "New wager," he said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who knew his words would land exactly as intended. "Elena Martinez lasts 1 week. Give or take a day. She'll quit because she'll realize this place operates at a level that requires commitment, community, team engagement. The things that make a hospital actually work. Not just showing up and doing your job. Jenna looked up from the schedule. You're betting she quits? I'm suggesting, Hargrove said, smiling slightly, that quiet people without community investment don't usually survive in environments that require constant interpersonal navigation. Give her 7 days. She'll realize she doesn't belong. The implication was there beneath the words, clean and sharp, she didn't belong. She was a problem. And Hargrove had identified it before anyone else had even noticed there was something to identify. One of the younger nurses, Tyler, laughed. You're betting against someone you literally just praised for handling 3 traumas in a row. I'm observing a pattern, Hargrove said. Competence without community is just a stopgap. It doesn't sustain. Elena wasn't present for the announcement. She was already gone for the night, her shift ending as his began, their lives intersecting only in the space between hand-off reports and the careful choreography of shift changes. But word reached her eventually. Hospital gossip moved like cancer cells through tissue, rapid and efficient and seemingly unstoppable. She didn't react when she heard. She simply noted the information, filed it away, and continued coming to work exactly as she had before. What she didn't know was that Hargrove was now watching her differently. No longer as an anomaly, but as a challenge. And Hargrove did not lose challenges. The next morning, Hargrove gathered 6 nurses at the station during shift change. The fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh white as he leaned against the desk, loud enough for the entire corridor to hear, I'm calling it now. Little Miss Mystery quits by Friday. $20 says she can't handle actual pressure. The nurses exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody objected. Nobody ever did when Hargrove made proclamations. He had 17 years at Mercy General, board connections, and a brother-in-law who chaired the hospital's foundation. Power wasn't something he wore, it was something he exhaled. Elena walked past carrying supply inventory, her eyes fixed on the barcodes. She pretended not to hear. The pretending had become a skill, practiced and perfected over months of small humiliations that added up like compound interest. Her hands didn't tremble. Her pace didn't change. Inside, something ancient and trained noted every face, every silence, every person who looked away. That afternoon, the cafeteria packed with staff on lunch break. The air smelled of industrial grease and reheated chicken. Elena sat alone at a corner table, eating methodically, the way a soldier eats when fuel is the only objective. Hargrove approached from behind. He didn't bump her tray accidentally. There was no accident about it. His hip connected with the edge of her table with calculated precision, and the tray went airborne, chicken salad and iced tea crashing to the tile floor with a sound like small caliber rounds hitting concrete. 30 staff members froze mid-conversation. The entire room held its breath. Hargrove didn't apologize. He just stood there, watching as Elena knelt in the puddle of spilled lunch, her dark hair falling forward, and said conversationally, coordination issues, sweetheart? Maybe nursing's not your calling. The words hung in the silence. Elena took one measured breath, the kind taught in stress inoculation training, the kind that steadies hands before a trigger squeeze. Heat bloomed behind her eyes. She felt it rising like a fever, but she locked it down the way you lock down everything that matters. She knelt and began collecting shards of the plastic plate, her movements deliberate and unhurried. A single tear escaped despite everything. She didn't hide it. She wiped it with her sleeve without breaking eye contact with the floor, and in that gesture was something Hargrove didn't recognize, not defeat. Restraint. The kind of restraint that comes from having survived things that would have broken ordinary people. He smiled, thinking he'd won. He hadn't yet. 2 days later, Elena was stocking for kits in the supply room when Hargrove entered without knocking. He was holding a patient chart, Jacob Chen's admission paperwork, and without preamble, he tossed it at her feet. Paper scattered across the linoleum like leaves in a wind shear. Pick that up, sweetheart. Some of us have real credentials to maintain. His voice carried the particular venom of a man who'd rehearsed this moment, who wanted to be sure it landed exactly right. Elena set down the 4 bag on the metal shelf. She straightened. Then she knelt again, not quickly, not in anger, and picked up each page with absolute deliberation, reading each number and date as if they contained secrets. She stacked them perfectly, aligned the edges, tapped them against the floor once to square them, and rose to her feet. When she handed the chart back, she met his eyes. What came next wasn't a shout. It wasn't even loud. Her voice dropped an octave, and it came out like frost forming on a window. I've had steadier hands point guns at me, Doctor. His smile faltered. Just for half a second. Just enough. His jaw tightened, and he snatched the chart from her hands, but something in her eyes had shifted. Something had broken through whatever carefully constructed facade he'd assumed he'd be dismantling all week. He left without another word, his footsteps sharp on the linoleum, and Elena returned to stocking 4 kits as if nothing had happened. But something had. Her hands moved with the precise economy of someone who'd done this under fire. Dr. Mills, the anesthesiologist, stood in the supply room doorway. He'd been standing there for the last 30 seconds, having witnessed everything. His eyes narrowed with the beginning of recognition, the way you recognize a song you haven't heard in 15 years but your body remembers entirely. He didn't say anything. He just watched Elena for a moment longer, then turned and walked back toward the OR. Hargrove's confidence didn't waver. If anything, it solidified. He'd humiliated her publicly. He'd made her kneel. He'd forced her to pick up after him while the entire staff watched. In his calculation, that was dominance established, hierarchy confirmed, the natural order of the hospital asserted. What he didn't understand was that Elena had been in a room with people who wanted her dead. Real dead. Not professionally embarrassed. Not socially humiliated. Dead. The distinction mattered more than he could possibly comprehend. Elena moved through the rest of her shift like a ghost, checking on patients, updating charts, running full lines with hands that had threaded catheters in the dark using only touch and muscle memory. Her phone buzzed at 4:02 p.m., a text from her sister Maria that said only call me when you can, but she didn't call. Not yet. Not while the anger was still a living thing in her chest, burning with the particular intensity of someone who'd spent years learning to control rage instead of expressing it. The ER hummed its familiar rhythm. Monitors beeped in steady succession. A child cried somewhere in the waiting room. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed like the breathing of something alive. At 5:33 p.m., paramedics rushed through those doors with a stretcher moving fast. The radio crackled, 48-year-old male, MVA, approximately 30 minutes ago, seizure activity en route, vitals unstable, ETA 2 minutes. Elena looked up from her charting. The clinical part of her brain registered the codes, altered mental status, possible head trauma, possibly something else. The part that had been trained at Kandahar base and deployed 3 times to the Horn of Africa registered the urgency differently. She stood. She moved toward Trauma Bay 3 without being asked. The patient came in seizing, his body rigid and thrashing, his hands moving in frantic patterns that nobody in the room understood. His name was Jacob Chen. He was 48 years old. He was deaf. His teenage daughter, Lily, ran beside the gurney, sobbing, signing frantically at her father's face. "Dad, can you hear me? Dad, you're okay, you're okay." Nobody in the ER heard her either. The residents shouted questions at Jacob. "Can you hear me? What's your pain level? Do you know where you are?" And Jacob's eyes rolled back as his hands moved in complex patterns, trying to communicate something crucial, something life or death, something nobody understood. "Sedate him," Hargrove barked from the doorway. "We can't work like this." A nurse reached for the midazolam. Elena stepped forward without asking permission. She began signing in fluid ASL, her hands moving with the same precision she used in trauma care. "Where does it hurt?" "Show me." "You're safe." Jacob's trembling hands responded, signing frantically, crushing. "Can't breathe." Pressure. Elena's face went still. The seizure activity was secondary. The crushing chest pain was the primary problem. She pressed her stethoscope to his chest and heard what muffled heart sounds shouldn't sound like, distant, as if coming from underwater, as if something was between the heart and her ability to hear it properly. Cardiac tamponade, she said quietly. Then louder, because Hargrove was reaching for the sedative. He needs a pericardiocentesis now. Fluids compressing his heart. Hargrove scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive, based on sign language. Run an echo first. Elena had already moved. She grabbed the portable ultrasound unit, a machine the size of a briefcase that cost more than a used car, and positioned the transducer over Jacob's chest. The screen lit up. There it was, pericardial effusion, maybe 60 to 80 milliliters, maybe more. The fluid was collapsing his right atrium. He had minutes. Step back, Martinez, Hargrove snapped. You're not authorized for that procedure. Elena didn't acknowledge him. She reached for the needle kit, a 22-gauge needle attached to a catheter, the kind used for pericardiocentesis, a procedure that could kill you if you hit the right ventricle, that required precision most nurses would never attempt. She looked at Jacob's graying lips. She looked at Lily clutching her father's hand, screaming silently in a hospital full of people who couldn't hear her. She made a choice. Below the xiphoid process, just where the rib cage points downward, Elena inserted the needle at a 45-degree angle, aiming toward the left shoulder, feeling for the give of the pericardial sac. The needle slid past skin, past fascia, past ribs. She felt it, the subtle change in resistance that meant she was in. She aspirated. 60 milliliters of bloody fluid filled the syringe. Immediately, Jacob gasped. His color changed. His oxygen saturation, which had been dropping toward the 60s, climbed back toward normal. 85. 90. 92. He was coming back. Dr. Mills stood in the bay entrance, watching Elena's hands move with absolute certainty as she secured the catheter with 3 precise loops, an odd technique, unusual, not standard. But he'd seen that exact knot before. 15 years ago. In the mountains outside Kandahar. On a field medic's hands, in the dark, saving a Marine's life. His mouth opened slightly. He recognized her. Not her face. Her hands. The way she moved under crisis. The way she made impossible decisions and executed them without hesitation. Hargrove's jaw had gone tight. The room erupted in relieved activity, nurses mobilizing, more 4 lines, calls to cardiothoracic surgery, the controlled chaos of a save in progress. He turned on his heel without acknowledging what had just happened and walked out of the bay, his face a study in barely concealed rage. Elena finished securing the catheter securement, taped it down, and sat back on her heels. She didn't shake. She didn't celebrate. She just breathed and looked at Jacob's daughter and signed one simple phrase, "Your father's going to be okay now." Lily collapsed against the stretcher, sobbing with the relief of someone who'd thought she was going to lose him. Elena pulled off her gloves and stepped back, giving the medical team space to work. Her shift ended in 19 minutes. The paramedics wheeled Jacob Chen through the automatic doors at 11:48 p.m., his body convulsing against the stretcher straps. Seizure. Car accident on I-405, unresponsive at the scene, ETA 5 minutes before the first tremor took him. His daughter Lily ran alongside, her hands moving frantically in sign language, her mouth forming words nobody was listening for. 16 years old. Hand signing so fast they blurred. "Dad, Dad, stay with me, stay." Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. The nurses parted around her like she was furniture. Elena was already moving. She'd seen the ambulance lights flash across the ER bay doors, heard the radio dispatch crackling the details, male, mid-40s, altered consciousness, postictal phase suspected. She was supposed to be clocking out. 90 minutes until her shift ended. Instead, she was walking toward Trauma Bay 3 where the senior resident was already barking orders, 2.4 milligrams Ativan, cardiac monitor, get a line in him. The seizure stopped as they transferred him to the bed. Jacob's eyes rolled back, his breathing ragged, his body still twitching with aftershocks. And Lily kept signing, kept moving her hands, her face streaked with tears, and every single person in that bay was looking at monitors and medications and nobody was looking at her. Elena stepped beside the girl and moved her hands in the same language. Slow. Clear. The American Sign Language flowing from Elena's fingers like she'd been born speaking it, which she hadn't, but sometimes the military teaches you that survival means understanding everyone. Your dad is safe. I'm here. What's his name? Lily's signing stopped shaking. Jacob. Jacob Chen. He can't hear. He's deaf since he was 6. Please, he's scared, he won't let them. I know. Elena turned to the trauma team without breaking rhythm. He's deaf. I need to communicate with him first. The senior resident glanced up from the monitor, irritation flickering across his face. We don't have time for. Yes, we do. Elena was already at the bedside, her hands moving, her voice steady as a metronome. She signed Jacob's name. She signed the words for hospital, safe, doctors, help. His eyes focused. The panic in his expression didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something sharper, understanding instead of terror. Jacob's hands moved in response, weak but deliberate. Pain. His chest. Sharp. Can't breathe right. Elena's posture changed. Not visibly to anyone watching casually, but Hargrove, standing in the doorway now with his arms crossed, saw it happen. The nurse's shoulders squared. Her breathing deepened. She moved to the monitor and read the display in one sweep, her blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, the rhythm becoming increasingly chaotic. Get me an ultrasound. Not a question. A command. The resident straightened. I'm the attending. Pericardiocentesis tray. Now. She was already examining Jacob's chest, her fingers moving along his sternum with the precision of someone who'd done this before, who'd done this in dust storms under fire with nothing but a headlamp and morphine and the knowledge that the next 60 seconds would determine whether a man went home or got zipped into a bag. Cardiac tamponade. The ultrasound confirmed it immediately, fluid in the pericardium, the heart's protective sac, filling with blood until the heart couldn't expand, couldn't pump, couldn't keep him alive. Talk to him, Elena told Lily, signing the same words. Tell him I'm going to help him breathe better. Tell him to stay still. Lily signed. Jacob nodded. His hand reached for his daughter's and Elena saw it then, the same tremor she'd learned to recognize in every combat medic she'd worked with, the understanding that you might not see someone again after the next procedure. Elena's hands moved across the sterile field with the mechanical precision of muscle memory. Betadine swab in a circular motion, expanding outward. The needle, 18 gauge, sharp, the metal cold under her gloved fingers. She felt for the point of entry, the space between the 5th and 6th ribs, and she didn't hesitate. The needle slid in with a soft resistance and then gave way to pressure. Fluid. Dark fluid, the color of old blood. Syringe, Elena said. Someone handed it to her. The plunger pulled back and the syringe filled, dark and thick, 40 milliliters in the first pull, the second syringe another 40. The room went quiet except for the monitor. The heart rate began to settle. The blood pressure climbed from 64/32 back toward something that resembled viable. Jacob's breathing eased. Elena could see it in his chest, the rise and fall becoming deeper, becoming easier. Lily was crying and signing thank you, thank you, thank you, her hands shaking so badly the words weren't perfectly formed but they were clear enough. We need to move him to ICU for monitoring, Elena said to the team. She pulled off her gloves and stepped back, giving the medical team space to work. Her shift had ended 8 minutes ago. Hargrove watched from the doorway as they wheeled Jacob out. His eyes tracked Elena's hands, not her face, not her competence, not even her obvious authority in that bay. Her hands. The way she'd tied the bleeder off with a specific 3-loop knot, the kind they taught you in combat medicine, the kind you don't learn in civilian nursing school because civilians didn't have the same enemies that blood and time presented. His jaw tightened. He turned and walked back to his office. The rain started somewhere around midnight, hammering the Portland streets like applause nobody had asked for. Elena clocked out and walked to her car, her mind already distant, already somewhere else. Tomorrow was tomorrow. Tonight she was just tired. She drove home to a studio apartment with water-stained ceilings and a neighbor who played bass lines at 3 in the morning and made her grateful for military-issue earplugs she'd never turned in. But Hargrove wasn't tired. He was furious. He sat at his desk in the dark, the hospital lights bleeding through the windows, and he thought about that knot. He thought about the way she'd known before the ultrasound was even done, the way she'd ordered people around like she'd been giving orders for decades, the way that deaf patient had reached for her hand like she was the only one who'd ever understood him. It was a threat. All of it was a threat. He picked up his desk phone and dialed Patricia Voss, one of Mercy General's largest donors, a woman who'd given $500,000 to the cardiology wing and expected favors in return. "It's David Hargrove. We have a liability issue." Patricia's voice crackled through the line, still awake even at this hour, the kind of person who checked work emails at midnight and thought it was normal. "What kind of issue?" "Credential irregularity. One of our RNs performed an invasive procedure without proper supervision. Pericardiocentesis. It's a puncture wound to the heart sac. If anything had gone wrong, he let the sentence hang. What's her file status? Incomplete. Military discharge paperwork missing. Employment gaps in 2019 to 2021, no verifiable references. I want HR to escalate this immediately. I'll make a call." He hung up and called the credentialing office. Then the HR investigator he'd used before, a man named Kellerman who'd quietly handled 3 other situations that might have become problems. Then the medical director. Each called the same message in slightly different language: problem, liability, verification, removal. By 6:51 a.m., the termination letter was written. Elena received the summons at 7:15 a.m., a text message from HR Director Sandra Klein: "Come to my office before shift. Urgent." She knew. Not the specifics, not yet, but she knew the shape of it. The way the universe balanced out. You step out of line, you get noticed. You step too far out of line, you get erased. She'd spent 23 years in the Navy understanding that protocol existed for reasons that had nothing to do with patients and everything to do with maintaining the hierarchy that kept people like Hargrove comfortable. The office was on the 4th floor. Grey walls. The kind of desk that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Sandra Klein was a woman in her 50s wearing a suit that probably cost the same as Elena's car, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable, which meant Hargrove had genuinely pressured her. "Please sit, Elena." Elena Saturday. "We conducted a verification of your employment history this morning." Sandra opened a thin folder. "Your military discharge documentation is incomplete. The Didnt 214 form you submitted has the service section blank, no branch notation, no discharge status. We also have significant gaps in employment records from 2019 to 2021 with no verifiable references provided. I worked rural clinics." Elena's voice was level. "Many have since closed. We can't verify that. And the military paperwork gap is a significant liability issue for the hospital. If you performed that procedure last night, the pericardiocentesis, without complete credentials verification, we have exposure." Sandra slid the termination letter across the desk. It was printed on hospital letterhead, official enough to be a death sentence. "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. This is a credential irregularity termination, which will be reported to the State Nursing Board." Elena's hands rested flat on the desk. Steady. The kind of steady that comes from holding steady while the world rests hook itself around you, again and again, until steady became the only option left. "Do I sign?" "Yes." "Here and here." Elena signed. The pen moved smoothly. Her name. The date. 1 year, 3 months, and 16 days she'd worked at Mercy General. It was longer than she'd planned to stay anywhere. She watched Hargrove through the glass wall as she left Sandra's office. He was standing in the hallway, his expression arranged into something that resembled professional concern but landed instead on satisfaction. Like a man who'd solved a problem. Like a man who'd won. Elena's locker was in the employee break room on the 3rd floor. She emptied it into a cardboard box, scrubs, the cracked coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Nurse," a dying succulent someone had given her as a joke about her ability to keep things alive, a photo of Danny Reeves in his corpsman uniform, his arm around her shoulders, both of them covered in Sangin dust, both of them 22 years old and invincible in the way only people who haven't died yet can be. And the unit patch. The faded thing, sewn into the jacket lining by her own hands in a barracks in Kandahar, the patch for 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The one she'd carried through 12 years like a talisman nobody could see. She held it in her palm for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put the box under her arm and walked out the employee entrance into Portland rain that fell like a judgment, cold and indifferent and absolutely certain that she deserved it. The rain fell on Portland like a judgment that night, cold and indifferent, and Dr. Hargrove sat in his office on the 4th floor of Mercy General with his door locked and his phone to his ear. It was 11:16 p.m. The ER had gone quiet an hour ago, that suspended silence that comes when the night shift finally stabilizes the chaos. He'd been waiting for this moment since the moment Elena Martinez had looked him in the eye and spoken about guns pointed at her steadier hands than his. "Patricia, it's Richard." His voice carried the casual authority of a man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. "I need a favor. There's a nurse on my staff, Elena Martinez, senior position, and I'm discovering some irregularities in her credentials that concern me deeply from a liability standpoint. I need you to activate your board connections on this." He listened for 3 seconds. "Tonight. Before she has time to get her story straight with HR. I need this moving by morning." He hung up and dialed again. The second call took 4 minutes. The third took 6. By 12:15 a.m., he'd made contact with Patricia Voss, board chair, Jacob Chen, hospital counsel, and a private HR investigator named Diane Rothschild who specialized in credential verification and had access to military discharge databases through a contact at the Pentagon. "Ms. Rothschild, the issue is straightforward," Hargrove said, his voice dropping to the confidential tone that made people believe him. "She's providing incomplete discharge paperwork. References are vague. Military service claims are unverified. In today's liability environment, we can't have someone in a surgical assistant capacity operating without full documentation. I'm asking you to flag this as a credential irregularity tomorrow morning and recommend immediate termination pending investigation. You'll be protecting the hospital." She'd been paid for this kind of work before. She understood what he was really asking. By 1:33 a.m., 3 separate wheels were spinning, and Dr. Hargrove sat back in his leather chair and smiled the smile of a man who'd just eliminated a threat with the precise efficiency of institutional power. He didn't need to touch her. He just needed to make sure no one would ever know who she really was. The sun came up grey over Portland. Elena was called to Human Resources at 8:11 a.m., 15 minutes before her shift was supposed to start. She walked into the 3rd floor office with her badge clipped to her scrubs and her hands steady, the way she'd walked into every crisis for the past 18 years. Margaret Cross, the hospital administrator, sat behind a laminate desk with 2 file folders open in front of her. Diane Rothschild, the HR investigator, occupied the chair beside her. Both women looked uncomfortable in the way people look when they're about to deliver bad news they've been told is necessary. "Elena, we need to discuss some documentation issues that have come to our attention," Margaret began, her eyes not quite meeting Elena's. "Your military discharge paperwork is incomplete. Your references from your previous positions are vague. Your background check reveals gaps that we cannot account for." Elena said nothing. She stood in the center of the office like someone waiting for orders. The hospital cannot employ personnel in clinical roles when credential verification is incomplete, Diane continued, reading from a prepared statement that had Hargrove's fingerprints all over it. We're classifying this as a credential irregularity. As of this moment, your employment is terminated effective immediately. Elena listened to them talk about liability and protocol and the importance of complete documentation. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She'd spent 18 years being invisible, and invisible people didn't fight. They just disappeared somewhere else. You'll need to turn in your badge and access card, Margaret said quietly. Security will walk you to your locker. The walk downstairs took 43 seconds. The security guard, a man named Morris who'd always given her a nod in the break room, didn't make eye contact. She cleared out her locker in 90 seconds, a change of scrubs, 2 pairs of compression socks, a granola bar she'd never eaten, and the photograph of Danny Reeves in its plastic sleeve. The photograph was small, 3 by 5, and showed a 23-year-old corpsman with a grin that hadn't yet learned what mortality looked like. She'd carried it for 15 years. At the bottom of the locker, wrapped in a surgical glove, was the faded unit patch. Sangin Province, 2018 to 2019. She'd sewn it into 17 uniforms in that dusty forward operating base, 1 stitch at a time, while Marines sat on cots and waited to see if they'd live to see their families again. Her fingers traced the thread. Still intact. Still holding. She placed both the photograph and the patch into a cardboard box she'd gotten from the supply room, added the dying succulent from her locker shelf that had somehow survived 2 years without proper sunlight, and walked out of Mercy General into the Portland morning. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't crack. She was a senior chief petty officer, and senior chiefs didn't break down in hospital corridors like civilians. They walked out with their heads level and their eyes forward, and they endured whatever came next. The rain started at 9:33 a.m., the kind of Portland rain that fell sideways and soaked through everything. Elena stood at the bus stop 2 blocks from Mercy General, the cardboard box balanced on her left hip, staring through the plastic sleeve at Danny Reeves' photograph. His eyes were looking at something that wasn't in the frame anymore. She'd watched those eyes close for the last time in a field hospital tent while his hand gripped hers. "You're the best chief I ever saw, Elena," he'd whispered. "Don't forget that." She hadn't forgotten. She'd lived 15 years trying to forget and failed every single day. The rain hammered the bus shelter's plexiglass like applause for a performance nobody wanted to watch. She could feel the weight of the box, not heavy, not physical weight, but the weight of silence carried. The weight of a name nobody knew. The weight of a medal nobody had ever asked about. The weight of 17 lives that still breathed somewhere in the world because of hands that now stood at a bus stop in Portland with nothing but a photograph and a patch. A car screeched to the curb at 11:27 a.m. Not a bus. A silver Corolla with hazard lights blinking and a teenage girl spilling out of the driver's side, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes wild with something between panic and purpose. "Ms. Martinez! You have to come back." Lily Chen's voice cracked with the urgency of someone who'd been driving too fast and thinking only of one person. "My dad, he's crashing, his heart stopped responding to the medication, they can't stabilize him and he's refusing treatment, he keeps signing your name, he keeps signing senior chief, and the nurses don't understand what he's saying and the doctors think he's delirious but I know what he's signing." Elena looked at the box in her hands. Danny Reeves looked back at her from the plastic sleeve. She could hear the bus approaching from 2 blocks away, the hydraulic hiss of air brakes in the distance. "Please," Lily said, and her voice dropped to the register of absolute desperation. "He won't let them help him. He says he needs to thank the senior chief. He says it's important. He says he's been carrying something for 15 years and he needs to give it to her before he dies." Elena set the box on the bench. She took 3 running strides and pulled the car door open before it fully closed, and Lily gunned the engine with the precision of someone who'd practiced this drive in her mind 1,000 times. They made it to Mercy General in 4 minutes and 16 seconds. The ICU was chaos when they hit the 3rd floor. The alarms were screaming, 2 simultaneous tones that meant cardiac dysrhythmia, and through the open door Elena could see Jacob Chen pulling at his four lines, his entire body rigid with the physical language of distress. 3 nurses were trying to hold him down without triggering another arrhythmia, and his eyes were moving in rapid, frantic patterns, his hands jerking in urgent signs that nobody in the room understood. Elena pushed through the crowd and walked straight to his bedside. She placed her hand on his shoulder, and the touch alone made his body stop fighting. "I'm here, Jacob," she said quietly. "I'm here. Let them help you." His wild eyes found hers and locked, and his hands moved with shaking precision despite the 4 in his wrist. "You're the senior chief. From Sangin. 3rd Platoon. The ambush. You pulled us out." The room went so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights hum. Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes." Jacob's trembling fingers continued, tears sliding down his face. "I was the translator. You carried me half a mile with a gunshot wound in your leg. You never slowed down. You never put me down." "I did," Elena said simply. "Let the doctors help you now." "I've been carrying something," Jacob signed, his hands moving slower now, more deliberately. "For 15 years. I kept it. I prayed every day I'd find you to say thank you." The room filled with whispers. Lily stepped forward and her voice cut through like a blade. "My dad wants everyone to know this nurse saved him twice. Once today with the needle. Once in Afghanistan when she was Senior Chief Petty Officer Martinez and pulled his unit out of an ambush under fire." Elena's face remained perfectly still, the mask of composure held in place by pure discipline and the weight of 18 years. But her left hand trembled, just slightly, and Jacob reached out and steadied it with his own, his fingers pressing against hers with the gratitude of a man who'd been waiting to deliver for longer than some people had been alive. The administrator's tablet clattered against the floor before Margaret Cross had even fully entered the ICU, her face gone white as she read something that made her hands shake and her voice drop to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire corridor. "Elena Martinez, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare, Combat Medic attached to Marine Special Operations, cleared for Level 1 intelligence access." But that wasn't the worst part for Dr. Richard Hargrove, who stood at the edge of the gathering crowd and watched his leverage turn to ash. Elena's boots echoed across the ICU threshold, rain still clinging to her shoulders like ghosts. The chaos stopped the moment she appeared. Monitors screamed their mechanical symphony. Jacob Chen thrashed against restraints, eyes rolling, searching for something his ears could never hear, a familiar face, a trusted presence, someone who understood the language of silence. His daughter Lily gripped Elena's hand with the ferocity of someone drowning. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed, her voice breaking as she signed rapidly, then turned to face the gathered crowd of nurses and residents and administrators who had frozen mid-stride. Lily's voice cut through the ICU like a blade. "This is Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez. She saved my father's unit in Sangin. She pulled 17 soldiers out of an ambush in 2018. She's been here the whole time. Working as a nurse. And you fired her." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was the absence of air, the void before detonation, the held breath of an entire institution recognizing it had just committed an unforgivable error. Margaret Cross, the hospital administrator, appeared in the doorway with her tablet trembling against her chest. Her face had gone the color of old bone. She moved toward Elena with the careful steps of someone approaching a monument she'd nearly desecrated. "Ms. Martinez," she began, then stopped. Started again. "Senior Chief Martinez. I need to," her voice cracked. She pulled up the file on her tablet, the real file, and began reading aloud as the ICU listened with the concentration of people learning the names of saints. Silver Star, for gallantry in action under fire. 3 Bronze Stars with Valor. 2 Purple Hearts. Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism. Combat Medic Certification, Advanced Tactical Trauma Life Support, Casualty Management. 17 confirmed lives saved during Operation Enduring Freedom, Helmand Province. Cross looked up from the screen, her eyes wet. "You were decorated by a 3-star general. You were decorated and you were washing floors and drawing labs and saving patients in our ER without telling anyone. A man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, tall, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed, with a navy ring catching the fluorescent light. His uniform bore the insignia of a SEAL team leader, visiting from the VA hospital 2 blocks over. "I know her record," he said quietly. "May I?" Cross handed him the tablet. He read in silence, then looked directly at Elena with an expression that moved from confusion to awe to something deeper, recognition. The kind that passes between people who have held the same weight and survived the crushing. He turned to face the assembled staff. "Silver Star. That's exceptional valor. That's," he paused, collected himself. "Bronze Star with valor, once. Twice. 3 times. Each medal got its own sentence, its own reverence, building like an incantation. That's leadership under fire. That's people coming home because of decisions this woman made. And you told her she had credential irregularities." Hargrove tried to move toward the exit. The same security guard who'd escorted Elena out 6 hours earlier, a woman named Valdez with the compassion of someone who'd seen too much injustice, gently stepped into his path without touching him. Jacob Chen's trembling hand reached into his jacket. When it emerged, he held a patch, faded, oil-stained, stitched into the lining with the kind of care that only a soldier understands. Echo Platoon. The dates, 2018. The names of 12 people sewn in careful thread, including one labeled Chief. He pressed it into Elena's palm, and when she closed her fingers around it, her shoulders dropped for the first time since walking through those doors. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the release of 3 years holding up a sky alone. Torres, the Marine veteran from IT, stepped forward with a USB drive held like evidence, because it was. "Dr. Hargrove attempted to delete security footage last night at 11:56 p.m., he said, his voice the flat precision of someone delivering a court-martial record. "Cafeteria incident. Chart throwing. The nurse's station where he made the public bet. I flagged the deletion attempt per protocol. Saved every frame before the command processed. All backed up to VA cloud compliance servers. Timestamped. Archived." He looked at Hargrove without malice, just the clarity of a Marine who had seen real consequences for real actions. "The deletion log shows you selected those 3 cameras and typed delete all footage, Martinez. Your login. Your timestamp." Margaret Cross made the first call to Hospital Council. The second call to the State Medical Board. She said 12 words total. When she hung up, she looked at Hargrove and held out her hand. "Your badge. You're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect personal items. Your home office key is also surrendered. Your access codes are revoked as of this moment." Hargrove's face went through a transformation that would have been tragic if it hadn't been karmic, the flush of shame, the pale white of understanding, the slack jaw of a man watching his leverage evaporate. "This is a misunderstanding. I was investigating a separate incident. I was reviewing footage for what?" Cross's voice was ice water over granite. "The incident where you knocked her food onto the floor. The incident where you threw a patient chart at a combat veteran's feet. Those incidents." She gestured to the screens where the cafeteria footage now played in high definition, Hargrove deliberately hip-checking Elena's tray, watching her kneel to clean it, standing over her in the spill without offering a hand. A resident made a sound between a gasp and a sob. Dr. Mills said quietly, "You absolute bastard." The security escort that appeared 5 minutes later was Valdez. She didn't touch Hargrove, didn't speak, just walked him past the silent crowd toward the elevator. Elena watched him go without expression, her fingers still wrapped around that faded unit patch. But Jacob squeezed her free hand and signed, "Justice." The sign was small, deliberate, undeniable. He repeated it. "Justice." 6 months later, Elena stood in her new office as Director of Veteran Services at Mercy General. Her desk faced a window that overlooked Portland's downtown, the Willamette River visible in the distance like a ribbon of possibility. The walls held 3 framed pieces, her Silver Star citation under glass with its ribbon and official seal, a photograph of her and Jacob Chen both smiling with his hand signing "Thank you" frozen in that single frame, and beneath them all, mounted on navy blue velvet, that faded unit patch with a small brass plaque reading, Echo Platoon, Sangin, 2018. Never forgotten. Jacob came in for his cardiac follow-up appointment on Thursdays. He brought Lily, who was now volunteering in the ER as an ASL interpreter, turning Elena's hidden skill into institutional practice. The young girl had started a petition, still unsigned when it began, now carrying 800 signatures, to implement deaf and hard of hearing protocols in all Portland area emergency departments. The petition had reached the state health department. Lily had a meeting with the commissioner next month. Dr. Mills stopped by Elena's office with coffee, good coffee, from the cafe outside, not the swill from the staff break room, and he handed her the cup with a grin. "Staff meeting in 10, Chief," he said, using her old rank the way people use language they've learned to respect. The rank fit different when spoken with genuine honor. Through her window, Elena could see the veteran memorial statue in the hospital courtyard where her name had been added to the bronze plaque alongside Portland's other decorated service members. She'd walked past it twice and neither time looked directly, but she knew it was there. Permanent. Witnessed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, the first contact in 3 years since Elena had disappeared into Portland with nothing but trauma and silence. The text was brief. "I saw the news article. I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" Elena typed back, "Yes." Just one word. Then she added, "Dinner Sunday." The response came immediately, "I'll make your favorite." That evening, Elena drove home past a strip mall on Southeast Powell Boulevard. A folding table sat outside a tax preparation office, and a man in a cheap suit handed flyers to passing shoppers who mostly walked past without looking. Dr. Richard Hargrove's medical license had been suspended pending investigation. The wrongful termination settlement had come through. Elena had donated it to a scholarship fund for nurses from underrepresented backgrounds. 3 other women from Mercy General had come forward with harassment complaints once the footage went public. One of them had decided to take a promotion to a different hospital system. 2 had stayed and watched Hargrove's descent with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from vindication. Elena didn't slow down as she drove past. Didn't stare. Just kept her eyes forward and her hand steady on the wheel, the way you do when you've learned that some people solve themselves through their own choices. Her new apartment was small, bright, with walls that had never held her secrets. For the first time in 3 years, she unpacked the shadow box from her Navy service, the official military frame with her medals arranged in their proper order, her discharge papers, her commendation letters, Danny's photograph. She hung it on the wall beside a new photograph, herself at age 28 in dress whites, and another one from last month at Mercy General's Veteran Appreciation event. The woman in the second photo looked lighter. Visible. Found. That night she went back to Mercy General for a night shift, by choice now, not as penance, not as hiding. She wore her credentials openly, her unit patch on her lanyard beside her RN badge, the one that now read Elena Martinez, RN, Director of Veteran Services. The ICU recognized her as she walked past. Residents nodded with the deference of people learning their hierarchy from someone whose actual hierarchy existed far above hospital politics. Nurses greeted her by name. A young Marine with a leg wound lay in Trauma Bay 3, and when he saw her unit patch, he tried to salute from his gurney. His arm jerked upward despite the pain. Elena gently pressed his hand back down and smiled, the first genuine smile that hadn't been about survival. "Let's get you taken care of, Marine," she said. "Your X-rays already processing. Looks like the fracture's clean. You're going to be fine." The Marine's eyes went wet. "Senior Chief." "Just a nurse," Elena said. But she didn't mean it. Not anymore. The words came out the way she meant them, not self-deprecating, but honest. Just a nurse. And just a nurse who could change the course of a person's healing. Just a nurse who could transform a hospital culture from the inside. Just a nurse with a silver star and a battlefield's worth of experience and the kind of quiet authority that no promotion could grant and no insult could diminish. She turned back to the monitors, her hands moving with the precision of muscle memory that had survived war, silence, and vindication. In the harsh white light of the trauma bay, she was exactly where she belonged. If you've ever felt invisible at work despite what you bring to the table, or if you know someone underestimated because of a quiet exterior, Elena's story is the reminder we all need. Subscribe for more stories of hidden strength and earned respect, and in the comments, tell us, have you ever been badly misjudged, only to eventually prove someone completely wrong?